Yeah, it's my pleasure to be here. Yeah, so I'm a plant ecologist. We've got a 5-year long project at this point looking at tree planting success along the High Line Canal Greenway, and I'll tell you all about it when I start the talk, which I'm going to go ahead and do. So I think I have 35 minutes and 10 minutes for
Yeah,
questions.
till 10 o'clock.
Oh, till 10. Okay. So I'm going to start the slideshow. Can you all see it?
There it is. You're good to
There it
go.
is. Okay. So yeah, I'm going to talk to you today about a project that we've been doing for a few years now. I think you may be the first group ever that sees me have to wear glasses while I give a talk. I've officially like crossed the line and can no longer pretend that it's not necessary. So um, I'm thrilled to be here to share this data with you today. And I'm going to give you a 4-year update on this project. We just took the 5th year of data, but I did not get a chance to crunch it and take a look at it today. So this group knows, and I always kind of start with the first 3 slides when I do an outreach talk about this project or urban trees, where I kind of highlight the huge importance of urban trees, the difficulty and challenges associated with getting trees in the ground in our semi-arid cities and towns across Colorado. And then I touch a little bit on the cost of trees. So this group knows that trees are so important for our quality of life in our cities and towns across the state. They have all sorts of ecosystem services that they provide. And in this picture, this is an outreach event we did a few years ago associated with this project along the High Line Canal. And of course, we're all gathering under the shade of the tree so that we can be comfortable while we chat and talk about the work that's being done. So trees are very important. They're so difficult to get established in our grassland and shrubland semi-arid environment across Colorado. Any place that's low elevation and not up in the mountains is going to be precipitation limited in terms of growing trees. So there's a picture of Denver from the late 1880s, not a tree in sight. It's a windy plain. And you guys all know that, but I do like to start with that kind of information. When I talk about trees, a lot of people don't realize or think of the fact that these are infrastructure that we really have to support. And then the cost. So this estimate is probably already out of date. This is about from 1 year ago, talking to some Front Range partners on a project that we were trying to get funded to continue this work. And this was the estimate for 1 tree for procurement, planting, and 1 year of irrigation, $750 to about $900 for 1 tree. So very important and expensive infrastructure. So given all of that, we really do want to understand what affects tree performance post-planting. And I think of a couple of different filters that trees go through. One of them is, here we have all of our trees. We want to plant them and get them into the ground and have them be healthy and thriving and living over the longer term. They're going to go through a filter associated with extreme events. So these are non-microsite factors. These are the things that this particular study is really not necessarily designed to capture and understand, but some of our trees are still going to go through this filter. So snowstorms, wind, all sorts of kind of stressors that these trees are going to experience, potentially vandalism if they're in a really high visibility location, maintenance decisions. Is there enough time and resources to do the necessary structural pruning on the trees? So this filter does not capture the intrinsic growth rate of the trees in relationship to their planting environment. But it's still not something that we can ignore because it's just the reality of an urban tree. Some of them are going to go through this filter. So we may lose some of our trees to this particular filter. Then they enter through the filter of the microsite factors, which is the filter that we're interested in capturing here with this particular study. So once your tree goes in the ground, how are things like soil moisture, light availability, the topographic location of where the tree was sited? How do all of those things relate back to tree survival and tree performance over time? So they go through this second filter, and this is what we're trying to get at in this study. So we can ask what I call pattern-based versus process-based questions, right? Both of which are informative and important to understand. A pattern-based question is simply, what are the survival rates of these trees that are going in the ground? We have multiple different species. What are their survival rates after 4 years? That's simply a pattern. What are their growth rates in terms of height and stem diameter across multiple species after 4 years? We can look at that and get a good understanding. But we also want to bring it to this next level of what actually influences the survival and growth. We don't want to just know how quickly trees are growing, but we want to know why they're growing quickly or why they're struggling, right? So we want to move on to that process-based question. So again, there's these filters. There's going to be some extreme events going on in this study that I can only hypothesize the mechanisms, and then we're testing the mechanisms of the microhabitat conditions or the planting location. So this work is going on along the High Line Canal. This is a 71-mile-long recreational greenway that runs from Waterton Canyon in the southwest, which is near Littleton, Colorado, all the way out nearly to DIA. It's a beautiful green belt. It's a very important natural resource for the Front Range region. And they have a natural resources plan that they're implementing, part of which is to plant 3,500 trees across the canal over the next 10 years. These are relatively benign conditions, right? This is not, okay, we're in the middle of the concrete jungle of downtown Denver. There's good soil volume, and relatively speaking, they're benign conditions, but not totally, as you'll see. So why are we planning to plant, 3,500 trees over time? The canal was dredged in the late 1880s, and Denver water, historically ran a lot more water through the canal. And for the most part, most of the parties that were receiving irrigation off of this particular canal no longer receive water from it. It was, from the very beginning, very inefficient. It evapotranspirated about 80% of the water that ran through the canal. But what it did do was create basically this kind of human-supported riparian habitat. So lots of cottonwoods, ash trees, willows, shrubs, recruited along this wet greenway that ran through the area. So now those originally recruited trees are either aging out, or they're just maybe not getting as much of a supply of water as they did historically. And so now there's thousands of people that use this recreational corridor every year, and they need shade, and they're used to having trees and the comfort of, the shade provided by the trees. So how can we think about measuring tree health? There's many ways that we can measure tree health. The way that we're approaching it here is to look at survival and performance of individual trees in relationship to the many of the factors that we know shape tree survival and performance. So that would include light availability, soil moisture availability, competition from surrounding plants, topography. All of these things either individually or interactively shape tree survival and performance. And so what we wanted to do was kind of measure them all at the same time and figure out which ones matter most to which species of tree. So this is what the planting scheme looks like for these trees. We've got 373 trees of 10 species, and each dot is a tree. So they were planted in 3 cohorts in 2021, 2022, and 2023. The cohort I'm going to focus on today is just that first cohort. So I've got kind of 4 years of data measuring tree performance over time since 2021, since those trees went into the ground. So the tree planting palette, it's a mixture of multiple xeric street trees, right? We call these our xeric street trees, even though, they're eastern deciduous forest trees. They're not particularly xeric, but they're more xeric than our native riparian species. So these are the several species that were put into the palette to be planted basically up along the trail. I'll show you a graphic in a minute that helps to explain it. but to be planted up along the trail and further from the canal bed where there's likely to be a little bit less water. And then there were 3 species of native riparian trees. So Populus sargentii, Populus deltoides, and box elder. So that's the full palette. And again, so this is kind of just a visual of what those cohorts looked like. So in 2022, we had the bulk of our trees go in the ground, 223 trees. We were able to add about 50 more trees in 2023 and then 100 more trees in 2024. So we're gonna, at the end of this, have 5 years of data for the first cohort, 4 years of data for the second, and 3 for the third. So this is just a graphic to help you understand the number of trees per species. I always wish that we could have more. Replication, it's a boring word and it's kind of boring to think about, but the more trees that we have, the more we can relate variability among trees to variation in the environment, which I'll talk through in a minute. So these are all of our species. We've got the Kentucky coffee tree, catalpa, bur oak. So the 3 native riparian trees are in that lighter green color. So you can see we had 16 of the Populus sargentii, 24 Populus deltoides, okay? And then the other 2 groups I'm not going to talk about today. So we're going to focus in on this 2022 cohort today. So this gives you just a visual of like the planting schema. The native riparian trees were sited closer to the canal bed, right? Not surprisingly. Not a lot of water is run through the canal from its head gate at the South Platte River, but there's a lot of lateral infiltration. You know, when there's a precipitation event, the neighborhoods actually often kind of drain laterally into the canal. So there is more water at the bottom of the canal than at the top, even if there's not water being actively run through it anymore. So the xeric street trees are going up by the trail to provide shade, and we want a balanced palette with some natives as well. So this is just to show you all of that environmental variability. There's some really high light conditions, there's some shady conditions, there's some high levels of competition, there's less levels of competition. So these trees are experiencing all of this environmental variation. So we can capitalize on that. It's a neat study system. So I want to go back to this idea of these different filters, right? There's this survival and performance, the filters that the trees go through. So we have 2 catalpas here. Well, you can see, you know, they're both surviving, but one of them went through filter number 1. Dun, dun, dun. Unfortunately for the tree, unfortunately for the investment in the tree, although, you know, they resprout, it's not totally a done deal. But what it does do is it takes it out of the study in terms of like the replication of the trees that we have. That tree no longer cares about, you know, the soil moisture and the light, you know, that's I'm not going to be able to relate that tree's performance to the planting condition any longer. So it takes it out of the study, whereas the tree on the right, that is still reacting and responding to the planting location. So this is an example of one of our catalpas going through the filter or not. This is an example of neither one of our cottonwoods went through that first filter, but there is variation in how well they're doing, right? So again, there's the ability to relate the performance of the tree on the left to the performance of the tree on the right in relationship to where they're planted. Okay, so just getting to some straight survival outcomes. This is our pattern-based outcome. We're just saying, like, how good is survival over the first 4 years? Very, very good, right? We've got 100% survival of honeylocust, Kentucky coffee tree, near 100% survival of bur oak, catalpa, etc. Those are the replication numbers at the bottom, just to remind you. And this bar is 75% survival, right? So we can see our 2 cottonwoods and our hackberry are the ones that are maybe coming down to a little bit lower level of survival after 4 years. Still pretty good versus a lot of other environments where we see trees growing, like more stressful urban environments. Comparing this data set to this literature review, maybe some of you have seen, that came out in 2019 on urban tree mortality. So I really like this graphic. What the authors did was look at survival curves over time. So here we have where that gold line is, 5-year survival rates. And then they broke their data set, these multiple data sets from that they've reviewed, into like higher than average survival rate, middle of the road survival rate, and low over time. So if you draw that line across from the higher survival rate, that's about 80% survival at 5 years. Middle of the road is 70, and low survival at 5 years is 60, right? So most of our trees are doing quite well. Again, I don't have the 5th year of data crunched, but I don't think we lost a ton of trees over the 4th to the 5th year. So doing pretty well. That doesn't mean there aren't struggles. And this is this situation where we're going through filter number 1. And this, again, I get out, I'm not out there all year long. So when I come out, I've missed the event that put the tree through this filter. I don't necessarily know what happened, if it was snow load, wind. Could it be vandalism sometimes? It's just uncertain from my perspective. I would love feedback or thoughts from other folks. But once the tree goes through this filter, it's out of our data set for understanding planting conditions. So I just wanted to show you a little bit of what that looks like across all the trees. So things I've covered up in green, sampling years 1 through 4 on the x-axis, and then the proportion of trees with major canopy damage. If they're covered in green, it has not really been a problem for that species over the course of 4 years. So here's our Quercus muhlenbergii, our chinkapin oak. So for example, in year 1, no major damage or issues with the canopy. By year 2, we have 10% of our trees that have gone through filter number 1. By year 4, we're up to 15% of the trees that have gone through. Not bad. It's 3 out of 20 trees that come out of the study. And that, again, we may want to think about, okay, is there some other issue we can think through here to make it so that the trees are less often going through these filters? But for all these species, the celtis, our honeylocust, the acer negundo, no damage in the 1st year. Oh, and I wanted to say, so if you look at that, the celtis occidentalis, so 2 out of 11 trees went through that filter. The proportion of trees goes down because we lost the tree. The trees are dead and gone. And so if a proportion goes down, it's because we've lost the tree completely. So pretty good across almost all species. We're not seeing too much of an issue with the major canopy damage. I put the Populus sargentii and the Quercus macrocarpa kind of in a yellow zone. Like maybe we're a little bit worried about those. We're up to about 30% major canopy damage of Populus sargentii by year 2. The Quercus, 8 of 29 trees by year 3. And then the one that we kind of really had some struggles with was the Kentucky coffee tree. So about 40% of those went through that major kind of catastrophic filter and have come out of the data set. So why could this be? Just thinking through some reasons for it, we can think about what's called a slenderness coefficient. So if you look at a city skyline, this is just an engineering principle and a principle applied to trees, right? The taller something is relative to its width, the more you're going to have to deal with issues. Like in a city skyline, you have to put a lot of counterweights up at the top of those really tall, narrow towers in order to deal with wind load. You can think of trees in the same way. And we can also think of growth rates and whether the wood is strong or weak. So I just looked at the height to diameter ratio, or the slenderness coefficient, of some of our species here. So we can see, I'm just hiding you all on the right-hand side so I can see my graph. So we had our gymnocladus, right, that we felt like we were having some struggles with. And you do see that it does have a high slenderness coefficient. So that could make it more susceptible to wind load and snow load. And it's also just kind of a widely branching canopy. So if there is a late spring snow or something like that, that can be problematic for this particular tree. The Populus sargentii, I kind of maybe mentally put that into maybe there was just some bad luck there, because why would it be any different than the populus deltoides? I'm not sure I would expect it to be. Neither the Sargentii or the Macrocarpa had particularly high slenderness coefficients, whereas some of our other species did and really didn't have too much problem with that breakage. So we can think through, are they fast growing or slow growing? So for the Quercus macrocarpa, it's slow growing. It's not doesn't have a high slenderness coefficient. Maybe we're just having some bad luck there for some reason that is not intrinsic to the tree. And whether the wood is strong or weak. So this is just kind of how I think through things. Like, can we really explain what we're seeing with the biology of the tree? Honestly, not really, except for maybe the gymnocladus. And otherwise, I'm open to thoughts on this. Okay. So we've got, going back to our questions, what are the survival rates across species? What are the growth rates? Let's look at growth rates over 4 years here. So I think of these next couple graphs as racehorses approaching the finish line of a race. And you'll see why in a minute, like which species is growing fastest and which one is going to win. So here's some graphs. Okay, I've got them covered up, but all the species are listed on the x-axis. And then the height is in meters on the y, or if you prefer thinking in feet, the blue numbers are feet. Okay, so this is height over time. This is the first growing season after the trees went into the ground, and I have them, that bar that goes across is the average height of the entire canopy. So for all the trees that went in, on average, this is the height of the canopy, and then we can compare each of our individual species to that kind of canopy average to see which ones of them are growing the fastest. Okay, and probably not anything super surprising here necessarily. We see our two populous species are winning, right? They're crossing the finish line, the Celtis, Quercus, etc. So that's the first growing season post-planting. Second growing season post-planting, we see the Acer negundo starting to take off. Again, not surprising, a fast-growing species. Third season, same thing. Fourth season, still similar. Okay, so this is just pattern-based. How quickly are they growing, and how quickly are they growing relative to one another? And we can do the same thing for stem diameter, and it's very similar in terms of like how the species are arranged. The one thing here is that you see the Catalpa speciosa in blue. Its stem diameter lags behind a little bit in the beginning, and then it starts to take off. Okay, so in terms of our pattern-based questions, what are the survival rates after 4 years? Overall, they're quite high. Cottonwoods and hackberries with the lowest survival at this point in time. What are the growth rates? So the height growth varies quite a bit. So from about 1 foot or a third of a meter over 4 years in the bur oak to nearly 1.2 meters or 4 feet in the populus deltoides. So not surprising based on what we know about the biology of the species, but I hope potentially helpful to put some numbers on this kind of thing in a more semi-arid environment. And then the diameter growth ranging from 0.77 centimeters in the Shumard oak to 2.29 in the populus sargentii. So pattern-based, just want to check the time. Okay. But what influences the growth of the different species? In order to get at that, we need to look under the hood a little bit more from this pattern-based approach to look at individual trees. So this is literally the same exact data that I was showing you with the bar graphs. I'm just visualizing it differently so we can actually understand what's going on with individual trees over time, and we can visualize the tree level variation. Okay, so you can see the populus deltoides, the sargentii, and the hackberry. Lots of tree to tree variation in height. And the sargentii that goes down from 3 to 4, I think that tree started leaning basically, and it confounded our height measurement. I have pictures of all my trees, and I need to go back and check that one. But the point is, look at all that variation. That is juicy and right for us to look at. What is causing it? Okay, so for the Acer negundo and the other species is hidden by my sharing. Is it the catalpa maybe? The point I want to make here is that you're starting off with not that much variation in years 1 and 2, but then you're getting variation over time, right? So it may not show up right away, but it may manifest over time. So again, just looking at this data in a different way, and this is stem diameter, okay? Lots of variation to explore. What is driving it? Right? So we can take all those trees, they've got their variation in height, they've got their variation in stem diameter or other aspects of how well they're performing, and you can overlay that on the variation in the environment. So maybe this, gradient from blue to yellow to red is like increasing degrees of like soil moisture stress. And we can relate the two together. Okay, so if we look at, this is just kind of a rule of thumb to help us think through this. If we start by thinking about soil moisture, right? Because we're always thinking about that here in our semi-arid cities and towns, 10 to 20% may be considered stressful. 20 to 30% volumetric soil moisture is probably for most trees across most conditions non-stressful. 40+% is becoming a little bit stressful towards saturated and too wet. So we did do some soil testing on a subset of locations. We couldn't do all the locations, but across a subset of locations, for the most part, we were looking at sandy clay loam, and loams. Okay, just to give you some texture context for thinking about the soil moisture. We could not put out sensors. Like ultimately you'd put out a sensor and just leave it out, but it was impossible to do that with all the mowing and dogs and people. It just was not possible. So we had to go out and just take single time point measurements every year. Around every tree, we took 4 measurements, and then we took the average of the 4 measurements. So here's percent soil moisture over 3 years, 2022 to 2024. And what you can see is, even though we're doing these single time point measurements, we are still able to pick up like a bump in soil moisture in the year that we had a really above average precipitation amount in Denver. So that 50% bar, that's a saturated soil. The orange diamonds are the means, and then every dot is like a tree associated amount of soil moisture. So if we kind of put bars down to look at our 20 to 35%, we're kind of making some assumptions here, but like if that's generally speaking a good amount of water, you can see that a lot of the trees are falling in that amount. But for example, in 2023, are a lot of the trees actually above that amount? Maybe it's a little bit too much. Or in 2024, a lot of the trees are down in the 10 to 20% amount. So we can see, is that explanatory of what we're seeing with our tree performance? We can also look at it by species. So that this is that same soil moisture data, but we're just looking at it across all of our species. And for the most part, even though they're planted in quite different locations, on average, they're seeing a similar amount of water. On average, we're seeing a bump up in the amount in 2024 by all species. Okay. Okay, so this is the first sampling bout post-planting, and I want to show you a couple of examples in terms of tree diameter and soil moisture variation, how those are related. So for our Gladitia triacanthos, there's not a lot of variation from tree to tree, right? If we think back to those previous graphs, there's just not a lot of variation to explain. So it's not particularly surprising that soil moisture is not explaining variation, because there just isn't a lot of variation. Whereas for our hackberry, there's actually quite a lot of tree level variation, but it's not being driven by soil moisture. There's no relationship there. So variation, but due to something else. But for the 2 populous species, especially the Sargentii, we're seeing this negative relationship to soil moisture, right? And you can see when you come above that 30% soil moisture up to the 50, probably where their feet are getting a little too wet, there's maybe not enough oxygen in the soil, they absolutely are responding to that, okay? So this can help when thinking about siting decisions. Maybe we come off the canal a little bit. This is the first sampling bout post-planting. This same relationship held for tree height. I'm showing diameter, but the same relationship held for tree height. And then all the other species, no relationship to soil moisture. Second sampling bout post-planting, we're still seeing the sargentii hold on to that negative relationship. It's weakening for the deltoides. Third sampling bout post-planting, still there for the sargentii, still there for the deltoides, but weaker. So I looked at all of the other variables as well in relationship to the populous species, and soil moisture was what mattered most consistently over 3 years. And really, I think, you know, they could stand to come up maybe a little bit further from that canal bed, actually, relative to where they got sited. What about our other species? And remember, we're looking at all of these things together to see which thing rises to the top per species. Okay, so if we look at our celtis, remember I showed you there was a lot of tree level variation, but not in relationship to soil moisture. But if we look at it in relationship to light availability, we can see that there's actually a very strong relationship to light availability in the first year post-planting, and that relationship remains, you know, 3 years post-planting. And I haven't looked at the fourth year of performance data in relationship to the environmental variables yet. So you can see for the celtis, it cares about light. And we know that celtis cares about light. We know hackberries are very light loving, but it's kind of, I think, cool to put some numbers on it, just how much of a difference. You're looking at 2 meters in height, at 20 to 40% light availability versus, you know, between 3 and 4 meters in height at more full open sun. Okay, so here we're looking at our box elder. Remember I showed you that graph where there wasn't a lot of variation in the first couple of years between trees, but then that variation kind of opened up over time. So what we're seeing here is, I think this is the 3rd year. Again, like some of this is covered up and I can't see it, but by the 3rd year, we're seeing that there's that negative relationship to percent soil moisture. So potentially, again, a little bit of a too much of a good thing in these kind of somewhat clayier soils of the canal, and a positive relationship to light availability starting to emerge. For the Quercus macrocarpa, this was cool. It actually cared most about topography. So as the canal bank shifted from north facing to west facing, and as it got steeper, trees were doing better. So again, because we measured all of the different variables at once, we can say, which ones did this particular species respond to? And this one responded to topography and the chinkapin. So interesting to me. Again, it's not something that we don't know. I mean, one reason we mulch around trees, many reasons, but one of them is to knock back, right, competition from surrounding plants. So these are 2 pictures of chinkapin, one in a really high competition environment, one in a much lower competition environment. And you can see it actually does respond to that competition from nearby plants. So different species are responding to different aspects of their planting environment, right? So for the populus, it was water. For the celtis, it was light. Acer, light and water. The burrow was topography, and the chinkapin was competition. And again, because we measured as many factors at the same time as possible, you know, I consider that to be a good kind of hopefully maybe unique thing to this study, is you can knock out the factors that the trees didn't respond to because you've also measured those. And I would say, you know, minimal variation among trees is also an answer. We did not see as much tree level variation for the catalpa, the honeylocust, the Kentucky coffee tree, the Shumard's oak. So maybe they're not quite as responsive to where they're being sited. And that shows that there's a little bit more play that you have in terms of where you're going to site those particular trees. Okay, so some takeaways. Patterns alone are super helpful. I do think it's helpful to be able to say, in this context, right, in this canal environment where we've got plenty of soil volume, this species grew this much over time, and this species grew that much. That's super cool and important and interesting. I do think it's also important when we have the bandwidth and the time and ability to link the tree level variation to environmental variables. Now, I'm talking about this in the High Line Canal context, but we could determine what we think are the important environmental variables for a tree in any environment and try to measure them all and relate them back. This is time-consuming data, and so I don't know. I've been talking, like, for example, with folks from the High Line Canal Conservancy, like, how can we potentially convert some of this into community science-supported data collection? I know that's something I think that Freddie's going to talk about next, so maybe it's a good dovetail. But yeah, we have so many people that are passionate about trees. How can we kind of leverage that and work together across entities and integrating people into the process? Eventually, I'd love to move to more urbanized conditions where I know the struggles are different and probably even more challenging. I've been applying for funding for a couple different times and just haven't hit on that quite yet. But what are the factors that you would want to know most about as we move into these more challenging, really more urbanized locations? I think we can take the blueprint of what we're doing on the High Line and apply it in some of these other locations. I think I'm done. Yes, so many people have contributed to the data collection. We've gotten funding from multiple sources, which is so much appreciated. And I think that will do it. And I think I've got some time for questions. So I can stop sharing.
Thanks, Christina. That was really interesting research, and it'll be interesting to see how your year 5 plays into how things look for those tree species. If anyone wants to ask a question, go ahead and ask or put it in the chat.
How consistent do you think your planting was?
I don't know, Doug McDonald, he's retired. He asked, how consistent do you think the planting was?
The planting was done by 2 entities. The High Line Canal Conservancy used volunteers or worked with volunteers to get the trees in. And then I want to say, I think there's a couple of people from Super Trees on here. I think maybe Greenwood Village was the other entity. They may have used Super Trees to do the planting. So you mean in terms of like just depth and approach to planting, or?
Depth, any root pruning that was done. I was just wondering, as another filter, if that played any variation.
Yeah, I cannot get at that particular filter. It may very well be a filter. That the everything leading up to the time that they went into the ground, thank you for mentioning that, is another filter. But that's not something that I can get at in this study. I kind of have to start at this time zero. They were all the same 1.5 caliper inch diameter, just in terms of size. But yes, in terms of like what happened with pruning or this very specifics of like the planting, is not a filter I can get at, and that is a very important one, no doubt.
Thank you.
I think does John have his hand raised? Yeah.
Yeah, you presented on soil moisture relationships to tree growth, and you pointed to populace as being negatively responsive to increases in soil moisture, and that other species didn't really show much of a response. Did you find that surprising? I would expect that increased soil moisture would probably lead to some higher growth outcomes. And do you have some thoughts on that?
Yeah, I did find it surprising. I think one of the reasons is multiple of the tree species did not have a lot of variation among the individual trees. So that was one of those things I was trying to point out, that they're all kind of performing relatively the same, which that to me is surprising in and of itself, like that you're not uncovering some of that tree level variation when you're measuring it and looking for it. But if it's not there, then it's not going to relate to any of these environmental factors. And for some of the others, yes, I found it surprising. it was one reason why I was kind of showing the graphs of like the variability of the soil moisture over years. The soil moisture was higher, honestly, in a lot of cases than I expected it to be. Like I thought a lot more often we'd be down in like the 10 to 20%, which reminds me the trees were getting truck watered every 2 weeks with 30 gallons of water. I totally forgot to say that. So the trees that are 5 years out from being planted are now, for the most part, going to be taken off the truck watering. So we have talked about like what is the capacity to continue monitoring after they come off the irrigation, because at that point, maybe we'll see a whole lot of response to water availability, more than we have so far.
Thank you.
Yeah, that would be interesting to be able to do research on how, since they've hopefully established a root system, how they
Right.
fare without the supplemental water.
Right, exactly. And yes, I am interested to look at the 5 year data because we just had, of course, a historically dry winter. So it'll be interesting to see.
We have time for a couple more questions if anyone has some. Ooh, Adam Moore.
I'm going to ask the loaded question. And so, what is your what is your top choice you'd recommend, and the one you would fully avoid from your research?
Oh, that's a good one.
I think at this point I would avoid the Kentucky coffee tree in this context, okay? Like just from the issues with the canopy damage. And none of this is to, none of this is to like point fingers or say like it's not working. This is a very specific context. And if you think of like if you think of how a tree recruits in a forest, they're very rarely going to be standing in the middle of an open slope just out there, right? So this is one of the difficulties, I think, in Colorado is oftentimes we're putting an urban tree in, they're not recruiting with a little bit of protection and windbreak and, kind of in a more natural setting that a recruitment in a forest environment would happen. And so I think potentially they're exposed. They're just exposed to wind and snow load and haven't been doing so well with that. I think the catalpa is soldiering on like really well. To me, what I'm seeing with the catalpa is that it's kind of just doing really well. So those would be, if I had to boil it down, which I don't necessarily like to do, but that's what I would say.
Okay, thank you.
All right, well, thank you so much, Dr. Alba. That was a really great presentation, and we look forward to seeing what additional findings you have.
Thank you. Thanks for the opportunity.
Yeah, those are all really good tree species that we like to plant. So it's really interesting to see how they're faring along High Line. And now next time I come to Denver, I'll have to check that area out.
Yes.
All right. Well, thank you again so much. And we will be posting, just for everyone's remembrance, I post these meetings onto YouTube. So if you want to rewatch or see any of the graphics that Dr. Alba shared, it will be available to you soon. All right, we're going to move over to our second presenter, Freddie, with the city of Fort Collins. He's going to talk about his volunteer program. And I sounded like you had at least one of your volunteer folks on this meeting. So excited to hear what you have to share.
All right, we'll get going here. So yeah, I'm Freddie Haberecht. I'm one of the foresters for the city of Fort Collins. And in that role, I manage our volunteer team. And so anytime through this presentation, somebody's got a question, feel free to raise your hand or hop on and ask it. Volunteerism is an important part of what we do. It's just a small piece of our operation. So it's kind of fun to see how that can work into your own municipalities, your own settings. Like as Christina was talking about, measuring trees is a big part of what we do. And so these ideas can be utilized for any sort of, some of that basic maintenance and basic measuring data can be really efficiently done through volunteers. And I'll walk a little bit through what we've done with the city of Fort Collins and some of the ways in general we've helped keep volunteers around and kind of minimize the time and effort it takes from staff to keep that program up and running. All right, so ground us a little bit here in kind of our program. Can everybody see this? We're good to go as far as all right,
Yes.
excellent. Program overview. So um, basically our urban forestry ambassador program is we're going to look through how we build and improve our volunteers in our urban forest, and then recruiting and retaining volunteers is a big piece of this. Oftentimes you have a lot of people out of the gate because people love trees, right? Everybody wants to be involved with trees, especially in a lot of our communities that have beautiful urban forests, but retaining those folks can be a bigger challenge. And then what does it take to really get a volunteer off the ground? You have somebody that's green coming in the door. How do you retain those folks? And then train and onboard them so they're efficient out in the field and you have data that's coming back to you that's you can trust. So I'll walk a little bit through that. So what does CF4 calls look like? We're on a very much different scale than a lot of folks on the Western Slope. We're, large cities. So we've got 17 full-time staff, 6 seasonal workers and about 60 volunteers that work with us. So we're a fairly large team. We manage about 60,000 public trees in the city of Fort Collins. We own the trees and we prune them, plant them, grind stumps, everything except for water is what we do. And we water all the trees for the first 2 years after planting, every 2 weeks. So we're a very granular city in how we maintain our trees, and it's very much hands off for the property owners, other than requesting if they want a tree replaced. And so trees are pruned on a 5 to 6 year pruning rotation, and then inventory information. We're trying to get to the same rotation, and it's mostly updated by volunteers. And that's the big reason we spun up this program. And so the Urban Forestry Ambassadors Program it's about 60 plus volunteers that are on our mailing list. Not everybody shows up every time. People kind of pick and choose what activities they want to be a part of. And I think that's an important part of having a volunteer program when it's really monotonal and you're getting these, you get one event that people can do or one activity. And it's, in the case of inventorying trees, oftentimes you're alone, you're out in the field by yourself. When we were just doing that, we lost a lot of people because there wasn't that same interest. So we try to diversify our activities, not just for them, but also for us, because we're getting help on different things. So what we're doing is primary goal is, of course, tree inventory, and I'll talk a little bit more about what that means for us. But then also we're doing small tree pruning. So in those first few years before we get into our first rotational prune on newly planted trees, especially in new development, we're coming through and we're pruning those trees mostly just for raise up, a little bit of structure pruning, but we'll get our group of 9 or 10 volunteers out there and we'll go. And over the season, we've pruned several hundred trees using volunteers. We do education outreach. So we'll have booths, different places, Arbor Day presentations. There's a few folks on here, both Tim and I think we just had really good luck with getting volunteers this year and engaged with educating folks. And so we have quarterly meetings with an education presentation. So part of that is, trying to give the volunteers something that they feel like they're gaining from this, not just that we're asking them to do a task for us, but also that they're getting some next level of education so that they are the experts out in the community. And then we try to do 1 to 2 different field trips a year, and then a tree planting, some sort of public tree planting event. I think everybody likes to plant a tree, as we know. And so trying to get those volunteers engaged with that so that they're the experts in the field and they're educating more community members and recruiting folks while they're doing it to plant trees has been a really, really productive thing for us and getting folks involved. And so our UFA program history, we had a big maintenance gap in upkeeping our tree inventory. And I know as many folks in this group have, started in with having an inventory, right? We're trying to inventory our trees so we understand what we're maintaining and how we're going to maintain it. And so a big piece of that is making sure that data is as updated as possible. And oftentimes with tree inventories, there's this one-time funding, right? To get all those trees, get a platform of some sort of through GIS or through one of the proprietary platforms, and get all those trees in there and inventoried. That's really just a picture in time, right? And it helps with, planning for the future because you can have multiple, snapshots, but it really is, as a maintenance tool, it becomes difficult because that data quickly becomes out of date as those trees grow or are removed. And so this is an identified gap for us, and we're trying to figure out a way to close that gap. And so in 2021, we we opened up this program. It was a rough time to have a program start, right? Especially something that's socially based for, kind of peak COVID and trying to figure out how we're going to get people engaged with measuring trees and training them and getting them into the office and the rest of it. And so it was a little bit rocky, and it was a small group to start, of, 10 or so devoted volunteers out on their own measuring trees. And I think COVID was a good opportunity because it was a solo activity where people could go out in the field by themselves outside and just measure trees along a walk, right? And most of these are street trees, so they're between the curb and the sidewalk. And so in 2024, I came on staff here to manage that program, or took over that role and incorporated into what I was doing. And we expanded that program to 11 up to 40 volunteers with the goal of just trying to get more bodies in, was more people in the community that could advocate for forestry, more people that be aware of what we're doing and could be out in the field measuring trees. And so we tried to take a more of a volume approach just to get people in the door. We realized that by doing that, we also had a lot of folks that had varying interests and may not want to just do inventory, and we're losing about as many folks as we were bringing on. And so that's when in 2024, 2025, we started to implement some of those other ideas. Fort Collins is a long-standing Arbor Day program where we give presentations to every fifth grade class, which is a really large lift for our team. And so incorporating our volunteers into that, and then starting up a small tree pruning, which was an idea of one of our volunteers, Bev Shaw. Bev is, now got two kind of lead volunteers we've assigned to try to help spread that load of managing this group. Bev is one of those, and Bev had ran a similar program in West Lafayette, Indiana. And tree pruning was one of her favorite activities because it built some camaraderie in the group. People got to go out in the field together and, learn from these. We got this great team of professional arborists who are also, really enjoy teaching folks how to, do their trade. And so getting these group of volunteers out there with them and having this cross training has really helped engage a different section of people who may not be out there doing inventory work. And so as of this year, we have 60 plus volunteers. We bring on new folks almost every week. We've got quarterly meetings. Still going to have our next quarterly meeting tomorrow. And we're just still feeling out how this is still a relatively new program. I mean, we're 5 years in on this, and we're trying to figure out how we build sustainability long term, and keep those folks engaged and keep the good work going. So why do we do this? Like, what are the overarching goals that make this worth the time? Because there is a lot of time and effort on our part to train folks, and especially if somebody's in the door, you train them and then they're out the door the next day. What's that doing, and what's our intent here? The way I look at this is every person in the door that learns something about our program is an advocate in the community. And so no matter if they're only there once or they're there for the next 5 years, they're a community advocate who knows a little bit more about forestry than they did previously. And so when something, say something comes to city council and there's a controversial topic that relates to forestry or way forestry is funded, I can count that we've got a few more people in the community that at least are aware of what we're doing and are potentially advocates for us. And so we're creating a larger workforce, this largely free workforce that is out measuring trees, and we'll go into a little statistics of how successful that has been. And then we're reducing just need for for staff at public facing events, right? We want to have a booth somewhere. We want to do education and outreach to the community. In the past, you have to use all this staff time, which could be used for things that are more staff specific, things that can't be outsourced. So it's been great having one staff person and then 5 or 6 volunteers. So we're pulling more people in and just having greater touch points in any public facing event, which is helped, especially with our launching of our urban forest strategic plan and some other activities. All right, so inventory. So last year was our big inventory year. Just this group alone measured about 15,000 trees across the city of Fort Collins. And so when we do inventory, what we're doing is primarily taking condition ratings and then size measurements. So we're doing a DBH measurement and a basic condition rating. What we tell them is one snowstorm can change this from a fair tree to a fair minus tree. What I care about is that if there's a big dead limb or the tree is dead or dying, I need to know that for more of our maintenance. We're coming through on our rotational pruning. It's helpful to know those things. And so we set the goal of about 12,000 this year. If we're at 15,000 a year, we're burning through our inventory incredibly quickly between us and staff. So we look at that 15,000. That's just with our volunteers. When we have our staff measure trees on top of that, we hit about 22,000 trees last year, which means we're measuring every tree every 3 years. That's fantastic. I don't think that's a really sustainable pace. I think we had a few volunteers actually had. I'll put a caveat to that 15,000. We have one person who measured 9,000 trees. So there's always going to be those few people who just love being out in the field. And Ed, who is our rock star, um, moved to town from Wilmington, North Carolina. He is just one of those lovely people person who is basically going door to door as a tree evangelist, right? He is out in front of everybody's house in this bright vest. And if they stop and talk to him, he is telling them about the program and why they should join and why trees are fantastic and all the work that everybody does. And so it's pretty great. And so, but through him and through that work, we've also brought in a lot of people who see this person out measuring and said, "Hey, what are you doing? This looks really interesting." We've brought in some more folks that have been measuring, 1,000 trees this year, a couple thousand trees this year, and so we're already at about 6,000, 7,000 trees this year already. And this has been a warm year, so we got started early, but this summer we've kind of tapered off. So we're hoping this fall we'll get to at least that 12,000 number, trying to essentially get our trees on a 4 or 5 year rotation with our pruning. And we'll talk a little bit more about what we're doing there. And then with tree pruning, we did about 250 trees in 2024, which was the first year we did that pruning exercise. We just go out on Friday mornings, and this is a fun activity for folks where we go out and just prune trees for a couple hours. Last year we did over 500, and this year we're trying to do over 600 trees just in a few Fridays and mornings. This is easy pruning, right? We're just limbing up trees to make sure that they're not bonking people on the head when they're walking down the sidewalk. It's pretty easy going. And so for Arbor Day, same deal. We're upping our number of presentations, trying to maintain the same level of service we've given the community for the last 40 years, but using volunteers in a greater way for that. And Arbor Day has been a great way. I mean, Fort Collins historically, we give a tree to every fifth grade student, and we give a presentation to every fifth grade class. So this year we gave 80 some odd presentations, individual presentations. They used to be all with staff and then some public helps from the State Forest Service and then some other people from CSU. And, we loop in folks, but now we have this greater base of people we can draw on to make that an easier task. So what does that department impact, right? We've got an increased confidence in our inventory accuracy. So we're analyzed our inventory in 2023 for our urban forest strategic plan. And just last year, we reanalyzed to see what our average size of a tree was, and it had gone up by a couple inches, mostly just because those trees had been re-inventoried. And so maybe some of them hadn't been inventoried since before 2018, and we're finally this year, we should be caught up to everything has been inventoried in the last 4 years, which is a huge change. So that when we're going out and pruning in the field or we're checking for stumps to go grind, that data is much more accurate. It's not going to be perfect, right? Everybody makes mistakes. This is all human collected, but it's with that volume of change and, able to recheck those sites has been huge. Definitely increased, knowledge that our program exists and what we do, and community support for it. And then we've increased our educational opportunities for the community as well. We're providing more tree tours and we have more booths at, the farmers market and everything else just to have those touch points for the community. And then just decreasing staff time in some spaces with that additional help. And so what does our staff resource look for this? I'm the one staff person devoted to managing this program. So it's just me, for the most part, sending emails and just kind of keeping folks in line. But at this point, this program is robust enough, and we have a few volunteers we've kind of assigned in these lead roles to help with the communication and onboarding. And so it's cut a lot of my time out of this, and then so I can prioritize helping set up educational pieces and answering specific questions and keeping folks. I provide a lot of tech support, right? This is an online platform where we measure all of our trees. There's a lot of folks that may have not used the computer in some time, and this is something that they're really willing to invest time into. And so it's a lot of what we do is just helping folks understand understand how to use that and getting everybody on board. So that's been great. And yeah, so it really is not that much of, it was a lot of work at the outset, onboarding all these folks, interviewing people, setting up events when it's just one person working on it. But once you can get, a few folks that kind of show that they want to take leadership and want to take on some of that, it really has helped streamline this process. And so how do we recruit folks? Primarily it's just word of mouth, right? We're going door to door, already measuring the trees. So we run into a lot of people. Some of our best volunteers are just people we've met out on the street. We do some active recruiting at the city of Fort Collins has a very robust volunteer framework. And so we tie into that by having a booth at the volunteer events just to recruit more folks interested in forestry that may not know we exist because we're relatively new. And then we do host public events like tree tours in City Park and other places with high tree diversity where we can show people some of the fun things we're working on. And that's a great way to get people excited about trees and then get them in the door to say that they can be part of this program. How does that look? I know a lot of people are, standing up volunteers can be difficult, especially with, liability, right? We're putting saws into these people's hands and putting them on ladders a lot of times. So what does that look like? And how does that work into something that we don't get crosswise with our legal team? Well, we're lucky enough to have a city framework. We're always happy, again, as a resource if your community is looking to stand something up like this, we can share any of the resources and waivers and all the rest of the information we have with you if there's specific questions you have. Folks apply through this online city platform called Engage. City does a background check. City will notify us if people apply. And then we have a prefabricated welcome letter that lists out our upcoming events, activities you can be involved in, general seasonality, general timing for our quarterly meetings. And so every time somebody applies, before they even get in the door, even if they never show up to a single meeting, they have this long email showing them all the stuff that we do. And so if they're interested enough to read that, then they have a little bit better idea of what our program does and what forestry does in general for the city. And so we just, we email folks pretty regularly about what's upcoming, try to keep people make people feel like have a lot of touch points, right? We're not just saying, hey, you're out there doing inventory and they're out there on their own. We're doing regular updates, and we'll update folks on how many trees we've updated at every meeting. And then we clean up that membership list annually. We track who's been at what meeting. And so generally, if folks haven't been active in the last year, we'll just remove them off the email list and remove them from our volunteer list, unless we know there's other extenuating circumstances, of course. So meetings, they're on a known schedule. We try to do the third Wednesday of the month on a quarterly cycle. So we have one this month, then we'll have one in October. And so we do these from 2 to 4 p.m. So that's mostly for our staff benefit. We do lose some volunteers being able to make it just because it's during business hours. People have jobs. And so we do try to mix in some later afternoon events and things like that, try to get those people in the door. But we do this 2 to 4 p.m. event. A lot of times we have extra time on there to chat and get people to know each other because I think group camaraderie has really helped us retain folks. We do an goofy icebreaker question. And then we do project updates, make them feel like they've got the inside scoop on forestry in Fort Collins. Oftentimes we'll have the city forester Kendra there to kind of give an update on what she's working on or bigger topics that we're considering as a group. And then we'll have an educational component. Usually for the second half of the meeting, I'll find somebody in the community to come in and give them some sort of education around forestry. Like this week, we have John Frank with the USDA and with the Forest Service. He's got this mobile cart that does heat sensing. And so we're going to have that and do a demonstration for our volunteers. So something that these people are oftentimes, especially in Fort Collins, it's college town, are a lot of them are ex-professors or they're ex-Forest Service people or something. And so they're very well educated and ask excellent questions and are honestly a great audience for people to present to. And so we have had great luck bringing in really good presenters, and both groups feel like they're getting a lot out of those interactions. And so we always start with how and why we prune. This is part of our educational piece. Additionally, so all these folks come out, we'll put them in a hard hat, give them a saw, and show how do we make a correct cut, why are we pruning these trees, And I feel like that's one of the bigger things we get compliments when people walk away is feeling that they've learned something that they can use at their own home, or this skill that they can share with their neighbors when somebody's making a poor cut, or even around town when they are seeing arborists that are, lions tailing a tree or whatever. I've had our volunteers come to me and point that out, which is always helpful for us as we're kind of enforcing and helping our arborist companies around town meet a high standard that we require for them. And then we do a lot of tree tours. We look at a lot of trees together. More tree tours, more tree tours. We did this TSU Arboretum with Dan Burcham, which was a lot of fun. Then Fort Collins Wholesale with Scott Skogerbo. Again, providing these exterior opportunities. This is a bigger time sink in a lot of ways, is organizing these and getting those folks engaged. But always is one of the favorite events we do for a year, and it really keeps people coming back because they've had. I mean, if anybody's gone toured around Fort Collins Wholesale with Scott Skogerbo, you'll know that that's quite the experience and the storytelling and the rest of it. And so that's to get that as a kind of a private event for us has been lovely. We even did one on our local trolley, went up and down did a trolley tour. One of our volunteers, the guy in the what is the motor man is what they call the guys who drive the trolleys. He's one of our volunteers, and so he got us the trolley for the day or the afternoon, and we went around and would stop at wherever we saw an interesting tree and went out and we would, talk about it and get these folks educated. And then we do, how to plant trees properly. We have an event where we sell trees for $25 to the community every year. This year we had volunteers staff that to cut back on our staff needs. And so overall, just a lot of touch points for these folks to get engaged in the community. And I'm really looking forward to the following years where we can see how else we can get them engaged and educate more folks. We even did grafting one year, which was a lot of fun, and we're hoping to do more of that going forward. Just more anything that they're interested in, we're willing to bring to them, try to get them engaged. So, right, how do we retain folks? And so when I talk about education and all the rest of this, it's all about retention, right? If I can get that person to measure 100 trees a year, that's huge, right? I mean, if I've got 60 people and everybody does 100 trees a year, which isn't a lot. I mean, maybe it will take them 3 hours of work. That's huge. That gets us 10% of our inventory done a year. So biggest piece of that is just, providing purpose for these folks, making them feel like they're part of a team, making them feel like they're getting something out of it. We're not just asking from them, having that fun and camaraderie piece. Like we also do like a holiday, get together with a little potluck, things like that. We're trying to build that community and that fun aspect, and then get them engaged with our arborist community so that they feel like they're getting that the training and they get to meet the folks that are doing the good work out in the community has really been nice. So what does it take to train these people? So most U.S. UFAs have not a lot of pre-ID skill, even if they're foresters. Oftentimes, urban forestry is a very different world, especially when we've got close to 250 different kinds of trees in Fort Collins. And so we do some basic ID at the start with folks. We'll walk around, in a park and kind of point out what are the most common kinds of trees we'll see, right? Most of our communities along the Front Range. We've got 10 or 15 trees that are very common and a lot of trees that are fairly rare. And so we'll take them out in the field one-on-one with our smartphones, which is, it's not an app we have. It's just a web-based platform. We use Tree Keeper as our web-based tree inventory. And so we'll get folks out for kind of 60 to 90 minutes, usually in a neighborhood. It's easier to go down a row of trees than it is to go in a park where you're trying to kind of figure out where you are in relation to the trees. And we'll walk down and show them how to measure, do that inventory work, get them set up on the program. And oftentimes we'll do this several times through different group events and things to try to get people really primed and doing inventory correctly. We'll do tree identification workshops throughout the year. We'll just meet and just hone down on people's tree ID questions, and always tell folks if they have a picture of something they can't ID, just send it to me and we'll help them figure out why it is what it is. And then group inventory is great for those folks that may be a little hesitant to do it by themselves. We're trying to do them more often, maybe once every few weeks now, but we used to do them, just a couple times a year, where we get a larger group of people and we get everybody to partner up. So somebody that really knows what they're doing will partner up with somebody new, and they'll go and measure trees together and show them how, after you do a few, it's really a simple process. And we have specific step-by-step instructions and, and website and book resources. So we try to provide as much resources as we can for these folks that folks learn in different ways can get on board quickly. Here we are, another one. We do a lot of, these kind of group trainings, and the app can be a little, or the online application can be a little more overwhelming for folks. We try to walk them through each and individual step and what to press, what not to press, and it can be a little bit over the top, but it's worth doing. So here's Tree Keeper. I don't know if anybody else has used this, right? It's these web-based inventories are great, right? They're primarily like maintenance focused, so you can put your work records in there and you can put all the information you need about the tree. They're not as friendly to play on your own. Like, you want to pull it out to GIS, you have to do it manually. But it's super easy. So what we have them updated is just two categories. Usually it's what's the condition of the tree, what's the size of the tree. And so at that point, when we get them down to that, it's fairly quick. And we do have iPads for some folks. We started with 11 iPads for the original volunteers. Since we've moved away from that because of the volume of people we have is just not sustainable for that volume of investment in iPads and other technology. So what do we give our folks to get them out in the field? We give them a bright yellow vest that says volunteer. We have an ID badge with their picture on it to make them, seem as professional as we can. We have business cards, these pre-printed business cards with our forestry contact. So it just routes folks back to our main office contact, but it says you're a forestry volunteer. So this is great for folks when they're out in the field and somebody stops them and goes, "Hey, what are you doing? How can I reach out to forestry? I have X, Y, and Z super specific problem or limb in the tree or whatever I want to have dealt with." They can hand out these cards so then they can easily, without having to jump through extra hoops of pulling out their phone, they can just hand off a card, say, "Hey, here's who you should contact. Reach out for so-and-so." And that's been helpful to just streamline that process, make people feel more confident out in the field when they're by themselves. And we encourage folks to be enthusiastic with homeowners, and not every interaction is going to be positive. Everybody's got their different opinion of the trees in their parkway and the work the forestry does, but we encourage them to be, that positive public face, and they're not a city employee, so they don't have to sit there and listen to everybody, but at least pass off our information, and then also show people what they're doing, right? We have an inventory of every tree in town. It's great, especially if people want to know what their tree is, or if it's being treated for emerald ash borer or whatever. This group of people then becomes that conduit for folks to learn. And then here's one of our ID sessions, right? So we're doing like wintertime tree IDs. We'll go through and look at all the bud scales and all the stuff you do in, a dendrology class in college, and what we'll do with this group of volunteers who come from a diverse background. And so it's kind of fun to get people to look at the world as not just a bunch of green, right? We kind of have this the urban environment blindness where everything is just green until you take a closer look. And so we're really helping folks, and then we'll get folks calling us back, "Hey, I saw such and such tree. Is this, I thought these weren't very common," or whatever. And it is really rewarding. When we do our group inventories, I mentioned this briefly, but we do these, like this was over at the gardens on Spring Creek. We try to pick locations where we have a lot of trees that haven't been touched in a long time. And we move a lot of times through a neighborhood, and we'll all just pick a street and direction to go in, and then I'll float between groups to kind of make sure everybody's technology is working and we're getting things going. And so, it's a great opportunity. Folks really enjoy learning from each other. And then oftentimes what we'll try to encourage is that, "Hey, if you like working with this person, get their contact." And then people will oftentimes partner up outside of these events if they don't want to go out and inventory by themselves. We have a couple of groups of people that will just go out as a duo, and while one person measures, while one person's on their phone entering the information, and you can go really quickly, and it's a lot of fun to see that, especially when we're out working and we see our team out in their best measuring stuff. So that's what I've got for you. I went pretty quick through that, but I'd love to take any questions you have and have some conversation around your communities and figure out how we can best pass information to you after we've done some of the legwork here to get one program spun up.
That's great. Thank you so much, Freddie. I do have a Google Drive where I can put documents that people can access. So that would be an option to be able to share information. Um,
Yeah.
but yeah, if you want to stop sharing, then we can
Yeah, totally.
see what questions people have. I know that Grand Junction's talked about trying to get a volunteer group together. So I'm going to share it with the people on my board, this recording with them. But it does seem like can be rather daunting, but it sounds like you've had some good success and that's some really impressive numbers with the inventory and the small tree pruning. Um,
Yeah, once you get it, it takes a little bit to get it up and running. Was the biggest piece, and there was it was kind of stalled for a while just because we were trickling in new folks and um, really getting granular on how to train. We're interviewing. We started with interviewing every person as well, and we've got to just sending people in. We've got a large enough volume of folks that if somebody comes in the door and they're not a great fit, the culture is kind of set in a direction. So we just bring right now it's everybody who wants to come in the door, we bring in the door and we onboard them, and then we kind of gauge interest and availability. So it takes a bit at the outset. So being structured with what you want them to do, setting regular meetings is really helpful. So
mhm.
being really consistent on, hey, this is the time of day we're doing this. This is the month we're going to have these meetings, and this is the day we're going to have that. And then doing that in advance and having set rooms and the rest of it. That's the biggest legwork. And then just getting people to show up has been less of a problem for us, especially with those educational pieces. At least in Fort Collins, we have a big group of people that already works for the gardens on Spring Creek, and then for our natural areas department. And so a lot of the folks we have are folks that want more of a personalized experience than others. Those are both very large and very task-based volunteer groups. And so this is one we're doing a little bit more education and smaller team building, and that's been really helpful for us to quickly build our ranks.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. Yeah, the Grand Junction Forestry Board, we started having a booth at our farmers market weekly. And like you said, even people who we have started to, when people walk by, we've been asking like, hey, do you have any tree questions? And people are like, oh, no. And just this like last couple of weeks, we've started asking like, what's your favorite tree when they walk by? And that just like sucks them right in,
Yep.
which is great. But then even if they don't have a tree question, we're explaining like we're with the forestry board and these are the things we do. So like you said, even when they don't stay long term, you've created that advocate or at least that knowledge base in the community about what your forestry program is.
Yep. And it just having and knowing what resources are available to them too. Like for us, we prune all the straight trees, but a lot of people that are new to town are, not aware of this. So it's great just being able to have those touch points to go, hey, just a basic outline of what we do in the town, or basic outline of, hey, we want you to treat your tree for emerald ash borer has been our current thing of be aware of this current pest is as simple as somebody walking away. So that's been fairly successful, I'd say.
Anyone have questions? Rob, you popped up on my screen.
I was curious, Freddie, so with using your software and having, I guess, multiple questions, does IT have any challenges with allowing all these volunteers to have access to Tree Keeper?
Um, no, a tree keeper. So tree keeper is
No,
maybe they would if I really gave them the full scope of what we're doing.
fair enough.
But
It's
so tree keeper, we pay for it. It's just through forestry. It's not something that necessarily the only place IT gets involved is they download all the data regularly. The nice thing is if somebody really messed up on there, the worst they can do is delete a bunch of points, and it saves it every day. We can just jump back to a different time set, and so we'll lose a little bit of data, but it's not bad. And we haven't had that yet. I regularly delete people that haven't been um, active in a while to try to like minimize just an account going rogue and starting to do stuff. But it's not connected to anything else in the city. It's this little lone Davy based platform. And so I don't know if you guys use Treekeeper or Tree Plotter or which one, but
We have a program called Cartograph, and one of the challenges is it's growing. So it's just been parks, but now our wastewater and our transportation engineering are starting to take it on. And so it's becoming bigger,
Yeah.
which starts to flag IT more. And I just was curious about, like, you guys, do you have individual volunteers in your tree keeper system and you're tracking this is from this person, that
Yep.
person, and the
Yep. So
drop
it
down
tracks.
continually
So
gets longer?
that's the nice thing on TreeKeeper. It's a relatively inexpensive program, so we pay like a couple $1,000s a year to upkeep that. Um, and it's maintenance based, so I can put all my work records in there and my planting records and everything, so I can track more data granularity about the tree. Um, and then I can control who's, and it's the only information in there. And so same deal, we've got our bigger GIS portal with all the information. They just pull that points layer occasionally and put it in there a couple times a year because it doesn't need to be super granular for streets or anybody else. They just need to know that there's trees there. Um, and so because it's on its own little island, we can kind of do our own thing. And then every time somebody edits a point, it changes them as the last changed person. And so I actually can search by that and see who's been out in the field and who's doing what work by what they're changed. And that's why I know Ed did 9,000 trees, so I can look up what did Ed do last year. So
Yeah. Last one for me. Do you
yeah.
always have work on staff with volunteer events pruning, or do you ever let them go on their own?
We always have staff with them pruning, at least thus far. We're starting to get to the point where they're pretty well trained, at least the core group of folks. Um, but we make a nice run, we chip all the brush, and so what we'll do is we'll have one or two staff person with 10 or 15 volunteers. We'll split them up into groups of three with some folks that are new and folks that know what they're doing. Um, and then they'll just pile brush, and then we'll follow at the end and just chip all of it so that they don't have uh, don't have to do any extra work. And so that's been the best way. We just do it. We do it on Fridays. In May, we do Friday mornings from 9 to 11, and then in September, we do Friday mornings from 9 to 11 for the month. So that's just in those 4 days. In the 8 days, we've gotten 500 trees pruned. They're small trees, but we've cut out double leaders and limbed them up. So it's still work that's done.
Appreciate it.
Yeah.
Do
Anybody
you
else?
have to sign a liability? How do you do liability with these
We do
volunteers?
liability through that volunteer portal that the city runs. They've got a blanket liability form, and then before we've done any activity where we're doing pruning or whatever, we've run it through our safety and risk management and made sure that that matches. But since they're volunteers, and that same volunteer group, that runs all the volunteers in the city, they also do trail maintenance and things for natural areas and things that are not so far off. And so we've been able, at least thus far, that they get the thumbs up on doing tree pruning or things. Just with that basic waiver for them, just applying to be a volunteer, they have to sign that. And
Okay.
so yeah, so that's been nice because that streamlines it for us. So we don't have to touch things. So for planting events or things where it's more public facing, we'll have waivers for just the community members. But that's about it.
Okay.
Adam, looks
Go
like
ahead,
you
Adam. Sorry.
Yeah, we have some communities around where I work that have some state forest service urban forestry grants, and they're trying to engage and create a tree stewards program mostly with youth. Do you have any recommendations for engaging and keeping youth engaged?
I think it can be a challenge just because there's a lot of different attentions drawing to youth. And so I think the best thing is going through schools and trying to find really engaged specific people to try to use as your conduit. A lot of times when we're having youth, we're having one-time events, we're doing planting or something, we're inviting the Boy Scouts or we're inviting a specific school because it's in close proximity. And we don't have a lot of long-term um, because it's challenging between when Fort Collins with college students, right? They're really seasonal and they, day to day may or may not be there. And same with folks and kids in high school and then younger kids is just how do they get there? How do you keep them engaged? Way we'll do the biggest touch points is Arbor Day, right? And so we're already at the schools, and so we're bringing it to them has been successful. But otherwise, we don't do a ton with youth other than individual events. And so there's something interesting interest there, like um, we want to do a planting event. It's really canvassing with the schools and planning so far in advance they can actually plan on being there has been our biggest challenge.
Okay, thanks.
All right. Well, seeing as no new questions are coming up, thank you, Freddie. That was really a great presentation, and hopefully, I definitely think that it would be good to share some of your information that you've put together.
Totally.
So I'll get in touch with you about getting that on our Google Drives for people to access, and then share that out with the group once we get that done.
Hey, Cami,
Yes.
can I ask Freddie, how out of your stat, like your time, 40 hours a week, what percent goes towards this program, would you say?
It's it's hard to say. In the busier season, like with Arbor Day, it's probably more like 30%. Usually most weeks it's 10% or less. You know, it's at this point in time, it's like a tack on item most weeks. I mean, they're like this week we've got a few different events. So I'm spending hour and a half yesterday, plus we're doing group inventory, and then tomorrow we've got a couple hour meeting, and then we're doing emails on top of that. But that's the odd week out of the year where we have that much overlap. So maybe 10% of my time is burnt on that. But you know, especially, you know, it used to be a lot more. We brought on, you know, we had two volunteers, Eric, who'd been with us since the very beginning, and then Bev, who had run a similar program. They came to me and said, "Hey, we'd like to do more. We understand that's going to be so much staff time to do that. We'd like to just start sending emails for you." And it was like, great. Somebody else that wants to send the emails. So I'll send them updates. We'll plan schedules and stuff together, and then it's on. We'll kind of cast it out to them to help keep everybody rolling.
So the city of Junction is similar to you guys for how we manage right-of-way trees.
Mhm.
How do you get information to new homeowners about that the city manages the trees and what the homeowner's responsibility is?
Um, it's so there's a couple good touch points. One is we have a zoning inspector that does the permitting on every tree. So when people move in, they see this guy going door to door, and if a tree dies, they know to get a hold of him. And that's a good first touch point that somebody else is maintaining these trees. And the developers are pretty good about when they hand it over to the HOAs that they say this is all city owned. This is the maintenance responsibility. So that we haven't had too much. A lot of times, it's the first time we prune is usually our most contentious. As I'm sure Rob and you know, is like first time you touch those trees, you're making these big cuts because they're young and aggressive, and you're 5 or 6 years in, and the homeowner's going to come out and go, "What the hell are you doing to my tree? This is, you know, this is my property, blah, blah." And after that, though, the expectation oftentimes just completely flips, and then people are just calling us endlessly. So we don't do any formal education on it. It's more just we've got these multiple small touch points, but for the most part, it's rare opportunity that somebody doesn't know it anymore because it's a free service. I think there's a lot of times where people uh,
Mhm.
are more excited that they don't have to pay to prune their trees.
Right.
Everything. Yeah.
Yeah, the city, the forestry board, we created a trifold that talks about the city services and then also just general tree care. And we're trying to work with like the realtors and those groups that do like the welcome baskets to get our information out there because we are struggling to get new homeowners to know that, you know, you are responsible for watering the tree and then also educating our arborist companies. So if they get a call for a right-of-way tree that they know they need to come to the city.
And that's our way. We do have an annual arborist meeting. So we're in the state, we're probably the most stringent as far as our arborist licensing. We require everybody to be a tree worker, climber certified, and all these different things. And then they also have to attend a mandatory annual meeting. And during the annual meeting, we fill them in if this is the permit you need to get if you want to prune a tree, this is what you tell homeowners. And so really, um, we don't, yeah, that's great because then they oftentimes when they get called by a homeowner, they're saying, "Hey, you should call the city. This is going to be free for you." And that's um, makes it easy. But yeah, I
Thanks.
like your idea. We're the same thing with watering has been our, especially this year, right? Huge challenge. And folks either leaving a sod program on, you know, indefinitely and just killing trees with just so much water or completely shutting it off as soon as they move in because they're, you know, it's a drought. Shut everything
Mhm.
off. And it's like pick a middle ground, right?
Hold on. Go ahead, John.
Yeah, I'm sorry if you already addressed this, but my question relates to what you were just talking about a little bit on touching bases with residents on newer trees, within the first maybe few years in irrigation. Do you interact with residents on that topic a lot and educate, and what is that like, and sort of success that you have with tree mortality in those first few years?
We have serious issues with tree mortality in the first few years, like a lot of cities, especially in new developments where soil's super compacted. It's not an ideal spot. They're throwing in the trees at the same time they're doing sod, and so you're soaking out. A lot of the oaks, especially, just cannot take that environment. And so, um, our solution to that is, number one, we have a 3-year warranty period on all newly planted trees. The developer has to have warranty them. So that's getting some buy-in from those people to make sure that those trees are planted correctly in the first place. We have an inspector that then marks every location, marks every tree at at the nursery, and then checks that every tree is planted correctly, and then make sure things are replanted if they're not. So we've gone super granular in that space, and then they're following up for 3 years after that tree is planted to make sure it's alive. One of our biggest complaints with that whole process from developers is, what if that homeowner shuts off their water? I don't want to be on the hook. Fair comment. So what we've done is that inspector, because they're a door and door to door, they've got a letter that says, hey, here's how we got from our water department, here's how you back off water after turf. Here's how much a tree needs to be watered. And so they'll leave a letter on those doors if they're seeing an issue. And then also going through the HOA and the developer to try to, enforce on folks that aren't, using the HOA to say, hey, you need to turn your water on because you're, using the HOA bylaws in that space. So it's a lot of touch points and a lot of, we have a full-time position that just does do tree establishment for development. For trees that we plant internally, it's a lot more haphazard. We have a planting letter and kind of a maintenance letter we give to people when we get a new tree at their address. We try not to plant super unirrigated spots where there is a rental or whatever, where they're clearly not paying attention to the tree, and we're losing things, which is kind of an equity question, right? If that's really the fair way to deal with that. And I know in Grand Junction, it's like anything we have with drought, just take like 10 times and, make it a different problem out there. And so, for the most part, people are pretty good with newly planted trees, but yeah, again, super granular. I think talking to folks as much as we can and knocking on doors and the rest of it is the only way we've found their success. That warranty period has been great for us now, because that little bit extra on the hook for the developer gives them a little more buy-in to also knock on some doors and have an extra touch point. So yeah, hopefully that answers your question.
It does. Thank you.
All right, well, thank you so much, Freddie, for that presentation. I will reach out to you about some documents. It would also be interesting if you are willing to share like your door knock letters and
Yeah,
then the new
totally.
tree letter
Yep.
to share with folks, because no reason to recreate the wheel.
Yep. It's always better to share
you've
that
done,
stuff.
you've done the work. So thank you for being willing to share all your
Of course.
information.
Then if anybody has any questions, you also just reach out to me. I'm available, and we'll share whatever we have, because we're all in the same space, and especially this year with drought and just other changes to our environment, it's going to be an interesting one.
Yeah, for sure. Thanks. So now we're in the round robin timeline. We got to make it to 11 o'clock to get our full CEUs. So a couple updates from me. Just like I said at the beginning, the in-person Western Colorado Community Forestry Conference, I think it'll be our 33rd, will be October 29th, which is a Thursday in Montrose. I'm working on presenters, so if anyone wants to come to Montrose to present, let me know. Looking for maybe somebody to present on irrigation. So if anyone knows a good presenter who does a good job of talking about irrigation, that would be helpful. Topics are always nice, but people who actually present are even better, because that is the bane of my existence, trying to find presenters. The Colorado State Forest Service urban forestry grants are reopening today. We will send out an official email at some point today where you can apply for the the urban forestry grants. This is being rebranded from the IRA grants. So if you hear us say urban forestry, we are now talking about the IRA money. We are rebranding the name on that, but there's two tiers, 50,000 to 100,000 and 100,000 to 200,000 tier grant tiers. No match is required. So we'll be look for an email from Ash probably today on that. Also, Saluting Branches is coming up in September 16th. We have one here in Grand Junction at the Veterans Cemetery off of Riverside Parkway. So if you're in the Grand Junction area, you can come join us at that. There's also a big one in Denver. Was it Fort Logan? Is that right, Luke? He's listening.
Yes,
So
it's at Fort
yeah.
Logan in Denver.
Okay, that's right. It's a real big one there in Denver. It's a great opportunity to give back to our veterans. So just wanted to put that on your radar. Also, the ISA Rocky Mountain chapter's annual meeting is in Westminster, October 1st and 2nd. So those are my updates. Does anyone like to share anything, ask questions? I will call you out if you don't. Molly, thank you.
I don't know if people are also members of the Urban and Community Forestry Society, the formal Society Municipal Arborists, but they have a webinar series on fire in urban areas in the urban forest. They're free. You can find them on the website, and they also offer a CEU. So
can you throw the link to them in the chat?
Oh, great idea. Yes.
Thank you. Is that the one you're talking at, Thaddeus, that group that you're talking at the partners conference?
Yes. There'll be a canopy conversation on urban wood utilization and municipalities in state forestry's role in the process.
Yeah, so partners is that's hosted by the Arbor Day Foundation, is in St. Louis, Missouri this fall. And they hold some pre-meetings that Thaddeus is going to present out. Thanks, Molly, for sharing that. Kenna, if you're on, I'd love for you to share your problem child of the planting with the sand.
Yeah. So
get people's feedback on that.
Earlier this summer, we've had an area that has been kind of challenging with tree plantings, and we had our contractor come back from some warranty work where they've transplanted a couple of aspens and cottonwoods, and I unfortunately wasn't around for when they were doing the plantings, but shortly after realized that there was perching water along all of the tree bases, and just from like assessing the area, I could tell that there was like a different textured soil nearby. So I don't know if they had brought in a different fill, but basically like we got like a teacupping effect from the water perching. And speaking to the contractor who wasn't there, he didn't really know what was going on. I think one of the trees already died, so unfortunately, I don't think anything can happen from that. And then they're supposed to be replacing the other trees. They tried to do something to mitigate the perching water, but it didn't really seem to work. So I think we're just kind of stuck with replacing them, or unfortunately, I think a couple of them have already died. So
I don't know if anyone's had any experience with trying to fix soil compatibility, water movement issues on planted trees or not, but.
And I'm not sure, because they were ball and burlap. I don't know if anyone's ever experienced like that soil being a different, like a way different texture and that causing the perching. They weren't really like aware if they like brought in other soil or if that's what the different texture came from. But that hasn't happened on any of the other tree plantings. So
Are they digging them with an auger or are they digging them with a by hand?
I think they were digging them by hand.
Okay, that's helpful. Yeah, sometimes we've had issues with folks digging with an auger and just, we've got such heavy clay though, and so it just compacts it and does the same thing where we get that bowl because it's not breaking up the edge of that
Oh, sure.
the interface. But
Yeah, and this site does have more like heavy clay soil, so I thought maybe that could have been a problem too, just getting those like kind of um compacted
yeah,
edges.
A little experience I've had with perched water, it can actually be from two directions. So as Freddie mentioned, a glazing or just heavy clay where they haven't broken it up to roughen it. The other is if you're putting different soil types over another. Golf courses do this all the time. They'll put sand over a heavy layer that actually doesn't allow the right percolation. And great for golf course green, horrible for trees. So you might want to do a little soil pit and see if it's compaction, if it's actually the soil texture, and see what it is.
Yeah, I'm guessing I think it's like a different textured soil that they brought in because I did find some like kind of finer sand around the planting area. But I don't think we'll be moving forward with this contractor anymore, hopefully. But in the future, I think I just want to make sure that I'm more present at the time of planting to actually see what's happening.
Yeah,
Do you think so? It sounds like your contract is you're being able to hold their feet to the fire to replace the ones that didn't survive. Is that in the contract that's helping you?
Yes, yeah, we're it's been over 2 years now, but they have been still because we've brought these issues up a while ago. Like Cami, we used the inventory that you did for us to help with that. So they have been like um doing that warranty work, but now we're kind of officially out of that window. So I'm not sure how much more we're going to be able to get from them.
Okay. Yeah, they really planted some trees very closely together in some
Yeah.
mess.
Yeah. And then on top of that, there was like another tree that seemed to come out of nowhere. They said that it was transplanted, but I couldn't tell where this tree was from. It had a huge cat face on it. It just looked awful. And it's like, why did you even plant this here? I think they just took it from their yard and they were trying to get rid of it and planted it around our rodeo lot.
And charged you a pretty penny for it, I'm sure.
Yeah. Well, yeah, I mean, I think that was a part of their warranty work, but it seems like their warranty work is causing more work from us than alleviate the issues that they caused in the first place.
Well, I'm glad to hear that they are going to replace the ones that didn't make it because that's very frustrating.
Yeah.
All right. Anyone else want to share any thought? Thank you, Kenna. Anyone have any thoughts or things they want to share until the next time?
I just dropped in the chat just the link to the joint publication between CSFS and CTC. It's a few years old, but with all the wildfires going on in Colorado, it's got some information on what you can look at on trees to help determine whether or not they're going to survive from getting burned in a fire.
Cool. Thank you. Go ahead, Mark. You're muted if you're talking.
Something to throw out to the group. Thinking about how to try to better serve some of our smaller rural communities. Well, that's pretty much all we have in our valley here. And just think about a way to like some communities or towns share attorneys or share, accountants or something like that, especially for smaller communities. Like if anybody has any experience with like doing that with arborists, like having Alamos, our bigger community, put in like 30 or 40% of the funding, and then Monte Vista put in 10 or 20, and then Center put in 10%, like, just a way to have kind of a consistent touch point for us when we work with those communities, that has a decent idea of what's going on in the arborist world for that community, and just a way to kind of standardize and pool resources for small communities in a kind of a similar geographic area, is something that Adam and I have just kind of talked about a little bit, and just wondering if anybody else has any input or experience with that or thoughts on that, would be appreciated. And it doesn't have to be for right now, maybe for the next meeting or something, but just throwing it out there.
Yeah, thank you, Mark. Does anyone have any experience with sharing a community resource like a forester across multiple municipalities? Well, if you think of something and you want to share it with me, I can pass it on to Mark. But yeah, that's an interesting idea. Maybe something we can consider with our grant, urban forestry grant. All right, well, we have made it to 11. You have all earned your 2 CEUs. Congratulations. I will be sharing out information with you as we move forward, but hopefully I'll see some of you on this side of the hill in October. But thank you. Have a lovely day.